In today's lesson, we want to talk about every brush stroke being a finished brush stroke, which is the idea of getting us away from seeing too much detail, picking the brush up and putting it down too many times. When we paint, we want to be able to load up the brush, put it down and make a statement, and not have to go over it and pick at it all the time. That doesn't mean you can't make a mistake with the brush stroke, but it's better to scrape it off and then load up the brush and start it again. But this helps us to simplify shapes, keeps us from getting too busy, simplify values, and think less about color and more about value. Today we're talking about making every brush stroke a finished brush stroke. And we do this for a couple of reasons. Again, it's an exercise, but it's a way to force us to simplify. It's similar to maybe giving yourself a time limit. I used to go outside and give myself an hour to do an 8x10, or in art school they gave us 50 brush strokes to do an 8x10 outside. And it forces you to make every brush stroke count. And when we think that way, we do several things. We simplify, because if every brush stroke is a finished one, it's not going to be, you're not going to lift the brush up and down and dab the canvas 40 times to get a square inch covered. You're going to decide what value and a basic color, and then the direction and the way the brush stroke is applied to the canvas, in other words, where it starts and where it stops. So it really forces you to simplify it. It's also just a good way to paint. That's how I approach the figure more often than not, because I see the figure more as, in other words, it's too easy to get caught up in detail. So the more I can see it in terms of finished brush strokes, the simpler I can make it. And the more complicated the subject, the simpler I want to make it, so I think more about how to finish brush strokes. So I've got several examples here. These will be both landscape and figurative. And the first thing you always want to do with everything is crop. Most of my photographs, are more wide angle, because I know I'm going to bring them back to studio and zoom in either with Sketchbook or on Photoshop. So I want to crop this. And several, this image could have a vertical aspect to it. Long horizontals. This is going to be a less vertical. I was thinking more square. But all these work. There are several different images here to pick from. And I want to see this as more definite strokes. So I can almost think in terms of the shadow patterns here being more outlined. In other words, this is how I want to see it. And for brush strokes and the trees, the darks generally are going to be more the vertical, upright vertical. You can vary them sometimes. And then the lights are going to be ones that follow the form more. And I'm always thinking in terms of how few brush strokes can I put down to suggest that. It makes it look more like paint, and it's easier for the viewer to read. It gets us away from thinking in terms of detail. Now, the changes, I went ahead and did this on the computer. Changes here, the composition's a bit different. But 4 basic values as far as this tree goes. An overall kind of a middle value dark, and an overall kind of a middle value light. Then some highlights, and then some darker accents. So 2 darks, 2 light. Then as it recedes back, I do less and less. I could still have 2 values in the shadow here and 2 values in the light. But by the time I get back here and here, maybe 1 or 2 values instead of 4 like these are. But again, I'm thinking in terms of, in other words, in the grasses here, I wanted more violets, yellow, oranges, reds. They're all kind of warm except for the violet. But there's enough warmth in here between the red orange and the yellow orange that the violet's going to read as being sunlit. It's cleaner, kind of brighter. But everything, a simple brush stroke. I'm having the brush strokes follow the form here, follow the vertical shape there. and whatever I can do to simplify things and have the brush strokes really help in terms of the form. And then again, simplify it as it goes back. I can get smaller up in here, but not too small. Realizing that every brush stroke is going to show up, it's going to count. And it takes some practice at that, doing it over and over. Nothing ever comes the first time, or maybe the first 25 times. But these are exercises geared towards helping you simplify. Think in terms of simple value, simple color. It really will help you focus more on value than color. I made the decisions down here of these three colors. They aren't really the colors of the photograph. I don't like the colors in the photograph. They're too dead. This is in Sheridan, Wyoming, and there was a fire, I don't know, probably 50 miles away. So it was a little bit hazy, which I don't mind that haziness. If I wanted it less hazy, I would get more contrast between this lighter and this darker in the background. Just a bit more contrast would take away that haze, but I kind of liked the haze. Going to the next one here, this is a figure in New York City, or two figures. And thinking in terms of brush strokes as finished brush strokes is a good way to think about the figure, because it forces you to simplify. If I know I'm only going to use so many brush strokes in the figure here, I'm going to be more careful of how I apply it. So I want to think in terms of simple, dark and light, just like with trees, on her shirt, on the skin in here, and on the arms and hands here. But everything 2 to 3 values, because that's how many values it takes to show some form. 2 makes it look less flat. 3 makes it more three-dimensional. Maybe 4, but by the time you get 5, 6, 7, 8 values, you're getting way too busy, too many brush strokes. So I want to crop this, and obviously it's not a good composition as it is. I got 2 paintings here, the figure over here and the figure over here. And I'm going to go with the one over here. And she's going to take up the whole canvas. So my goal here is to suggest the action of the figure leaning on the stroller. She has a mood to her, and I want to suggest the light that hits her. So I made some changes here and trying to keep everything more simple. And I've got 3 values, a dark, a halftone, and a light in the shirt. I've got a basic dark and light on the flesh, and then some lighter darks in there just to show a little bit more form. But I got a halftone and a light, halftone and light, and then dark. So the dark I want to keep fairly simple. In the face, the shadow's big enough that I can get 2 values in there, maybe 3. But on the arm, just 1 pattern for the dark, 1 pattern for the dark over here, and then a light and halftone. Light and halftone are on the same side. They're on the light side, and then the shadow is really separate. So light and halftone can be a little soft-edged between the two because they're both lights, but the shadows have to be real separate. Same thing on the figure here. I got a definite shadow pattern, including the shirt and the skin color, and then the light and halftone. He's too small to do much more in the shadow. But everything's a finished brush stroke. I've got a brush stroke here that suggests the back of the hand. 1 brush stroke for the top of the knee, that's the lightest. Stroke here for the halftone or for the light, and then 2 strokes for the halftone and then the shadow. So every brush stroke, a finished brush stroke. Again, along the same lines as doing a time limit. Some instructors, figure instructors, will do 10, 15-minute figure poses, and you have to get the action and the light in 15, 20 minutes. And it's a good way to simplify values, simplify strokes and shapes. The background, I want a value and color that makes her stick out. So I made her shirt red instead of blue because that would offset the green a lot more. Plus, both shirts are blue. The child and it's New York City, so it's probably a nanny. So that makes it pop a little more. I'm using contrasting or complementary colors to create more contrast. And not too light back in here. I don't want the background to be as light as the lights on the figure, And I don't want the darks to be as dark as they are in the figure. So I'd probably get a darker accent up underneath the hat here a little bit. So it's more of a neutral middle ground or middle value dark. And that makes everything stick out here. Because the darks are darker, so they stick out, and lights are lighter and they stick out. So I don't want to go too many small value changes, and I don't want too many lights or darks. I just want a kind of a middle value dark. And again, every brush stroke counts. It forces you to really think about value. Color, again, is the least important. Just make a definite color from the color wheel and then get it the right value. The only other decision aside from that is how bright you want it or how muted you want it. And that's just by adding the complement. So the whole thing's designed to really simplify kind of the thought process here. This is another one here, again, cropping it. Got a lot of strong vertical shapes here. I like the water, so I don't need to include all this tree way to the left. Makes it more of a vertical or almost square. I could do a vertical, but square works well too. Not much of a horizontal composition. A lot better for the square. And same thing here. I want one overall, maybe two values for the dark, two values for the light, and have the brush strokes really suggest the form in here. Same thing with the water. The brush strokes would probably lay down more and follow the flow of the water. So it'd flow this way. Just kind of flowing brush strokes that emphasize the water's moving and coming towards us or away from us. Brush strokes here in the light that are slanted, dark that are slanted, ones here that are flat. And it's going to help to keep your paint thicker because, again, every brush stroke's a finished one. So you can't mess around with real thin paint. It has to be thick enough that it makes a definite statement. A couple more figures. The reason I threw in the figures here, I think they're good challenges, even if you haven't done much figure at all. It's all about the shape. And again, I can choose to make that a black coat or red coat, whatever color you want. But everything's value related. If it helps to take an image and desaturate it, make it black and white just to see the values better. And here I notice that if I look at it black and white, I can really separate the planes a lot better. The lights on the dog here are lighter than the lights on the ground. And I might push that value change a lot more. And, the darks on the figure in here are darker than the shadows on the ground. And the lights on the coat are a lot darker than any other lights. So that helps you simplify and separate the darks and lights by planes. This was in Washington Square Park. Simplify that background. He's the focal point, using brush strokes to suggest, folds, shirt, pants, and so on. So simple brush strokes.